What's up, party people? We're back after a long hiatus. I did not have a proper microphone to record content, nor a proper setup. So for a long time, I just wasn't feeling confident about the work product that I was putting out. Especially because I kept hearing feedback about just how shitty the microphone quality was. So we are back in business. Now, you may or may not, my microphone may or may not be picking up the what sounds like mariachi music in the background because my neighbors love to blast mariachi music on the weekends, or as it's known here in Colombia, música popular. So, but that's not why I'm going to be talking. That's not why I'm back here today. I'm here to talk to you about Marcus Aurelius. This is the homie. Best believe it. No. Here to talk to you about why I failed to scale to 8 figures at the last agency. Because as many of you know, and as much as I've talked about the modest level of success that I achieved in the last agency, I do in many ways feel like I have unfinished business. Where as soon as I hit 7 figures, I knew I wanted to hit 8. And for me, the sport of doing it is really what motivates me and keeps me going. So I thought a lot about after the exit where I went wrong. I spent probably like, I don't know, at least 3 months thinking about this and studying why. And I watched what I discovered was a few things, right? The number one thing to get to $0 to $1 million is, and before I even get into this, if you're below 50K a month, don't even watch this. Like, it's not even worth your time. For if you're below 50K a month, focus on getting to 80K. The information here is just not even going to, it's just not going to be useful or a useful use of your time at the present moment. So whereas if you're at that 60, 70, 80K per month mark, this is going to be useful for you because it's going to let you set the groundwork in how to establish the foundation of the business to be able to grow from, be able to withstand the capacity of growing from 80K per month to 800K per month. Now, you're probably listening to me thinking like, why should I care about what you have to say, Scott? You don't have the experience. To which I'd say, fair point. However, this is something that I picked up from Layla Hermosi when she talks about on one of her podcasts, growing from $1 million a year business to a $10 million business. And these are the exact mechanisms required to do that. Now, the other piece as well is that the COO that we just brought on board at Bread, he managed 200 accounts that were doing over $10 million a year or more in revenue. So a lot of this that I'm about to share with you guys comes from those two sources. And this is the agency that this COO that we brought on board, Mr. Evan Thompson, had come from. Pull them up. In the meantime, now they're actually the biggest agency in my hometown of Ottawa, Canada. See, like they're some big dogs. Now, getting back to this, what I had realized, and this is something that a lot of our 100K per month clients are struggling with, and the reason why why they've hired us in the first place to deploy our 8 figure infrastructure is oftentimes they're structured like this, where there's the CEO, and even though they technically have all these departments, everybody in these departments reports directly to the CEO. Why does that matter? Well, it's kind of like if you took a pipe of water and within that pipe, you have 24 hours within a day. Now, 8 hours of that is dedicated to sleep, and the other 16 hours are dedicated to free time or work or whatever it is that this CEO is allocating, however it is that they're allocating their time. Now, what happens is these individual people, they're operating within the business. They're working in the business, working on the day-to-day operations. Now, the CEO needs to manage and course correct in this setup how each one of these is going. For example, if you're the captain of a ship and each one of these people is manning a different silo or sail on the ship, then the captain needs to micromanage every moving piece of the ship in this setup. How well do you think that's going to go if, say, for example, there's 4 different components, and just in this typical agency, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different roles to manage. It goes back to that saying, a jack of all trades is a master of none. And there's a key principle in Kanban from Toyota, which was made famous by Toyota, about limiting work in progress. And how they have this set up is that each individual person on the assembly line just does one job. That's each person is responsible for one thing at a time. Why is it that they do that? Well, we focus on, if you have 12 units of energy in a day, you're focusing on one thing, then all 12 units of energy can go into perfecting that one thing. It's kind of like if you're sharpening a knife, you only have 10 minutes to sharpen one knife. How much sharper do you think that knife is going to be versus if you only have 10 minutes to sharpen 2 knives or 3 knives or 4 knives, and so on and so forth. And so what happens with the CEO in a 7-figure agency, especially if they're only hiring VA, this problem gets worse if they're only hiring VAs or near offshore talent. Because with near offshore talent, often you need to tell them what to do. You need to tell them how to think. Right? There's no really room for them to think on their own. They need a specific sandbox for them to play in. They need to show them exact instructions of how to operate and how to manage the machine. So the CEO is now put in a position where he's having to sharpen 10 different knives in a given day. God forbid there's a fire that they need to put out, and then all their attention goes to that fire as opposed to sharpening one blade, the business at a time, which creates a leadership bottleneck. And this is the problem that I see in all of our 7-figure clients, is that they don't have the strategist to be able to focus specific on each team to be able to take the feedback and implement a strategy that the team can then execute on. And instead, what's happening is that the CEO is having to plug in a dull knife that is the strategy to quarterback to their team. So let's talk about the first pillar of this. Before I even get into the correct org chart, I want to talk about business intelligence. Now, what is business intelligence? It's data. This is the first part of the ingredient of the process. Now, I'm going to get to the second ingredient, which is the company structure, which I talked about the problem with a lot of 7-figure agencies. But there's really 3 key ingredients, which I'm going to be diving into now. The first is, on the fulfillment side, is time tracking per staff member. And then the cost of goods sold. So what's the software? What are the actual pieces or components required to delivering the service? And by time tracking, what this lets us do is it lets us create a very clear report on, say, hey, these are the tasks that were delivered last month. These were the tasks that were delivered this month. This is how much time went into each component of delivery, and this is the staff member required in that delivery. And what we do is we divide their their time in the week or their salary, their monthly salary divided by 172, because it, fun fact, guys, it doesn't actually, if you're dividing salary by 160, you're not getting accurate numbers, because there isn't 24 weeks in a year, there's 26. So in order to account for that, we need to divide by 4.3. Excuse me, it's 4.3 blocks of, scrap that, mess that up. 173. So it's because it's 4.3 divided times 40 is where that number came from, which comes up to 173. So, or 172, but it's actually 173. So we take, say, somebody's salary, say, for example, we're paying them $4,000 a month, right? We divide their salary by 173, and that's their hourly rate over the course of a year, which is $23.12 per hour. So based on the software costs that we have, and taking a digital agency as an example, if this is a physical product business or a brick and mortar business, they're going to have tangible goods as part of this, but which would be your cost of goods sold, in addition to the amount of time required for the staff member to complete the individual task. Now, ideally, the agency only has one service that they're selling. I have one client right now that has a number of different services, and so it makes this process more complicated, where we needed to break this out and package it into individual blocks per service to understand the exact profitability of the service. The way that I like to put this is that if each service is a cake and delivering that cake is the end result to the customer, then we need to know exactly, okay, how many tablespoons of vanilla that we need, how many cups of flour, how many eggs, what's the exact measurements of everything that we need to deliver the best recipe. And this is the same thing that applies to business. And if we're not doing this for a business, then what you're doing is you're just throwing a bunch of eggs, flour, sugar, and vanilla in there and expecting that the cake is going to be good and profitable. And that's just like, it's just a recipe for disaster, especially if you don't have a way to measure your capacity. You're just going to get fucked. It's just like, and this happened with one of our clients, where they would hire to fill gaps based on their intuition of where it is that they needed to fill the gaps. But what happened is they didn't have a clear understanding of their capacity. So even though they had a bucket full of water, the business making six-figure months, there wasn't any water coming out for them as the owner operator to drink from and pull dividends from. There wasn't any money left over, because he had eaten into his margins because he hadn't done this work. So it's really important to have the second ingredient of this is to understand the financial performance of the business. There needs to be a regular feedback loop and management report sent to all shareholders or leadership every single month, which just takes into account the accounts payable minus, accounts receivable minus anyways, you get the point. Accounts receivable minus accounts payable. We don't want accounts payable minus accounts receivable. But that's in essence what the P&L is income minus expenses. Crazy. Wild idea, right? Let's have this reporting in place. But the best way to do this is, number one, is I'd recommend using Xero. Xero is really the best tool that has the most integrations with it. I'm not an accountant, but I have a very strong preference for Xero. QuickBooks just doesn't have the native integrations that Zero does. And Zero was actually founded by accountants who use QuickBooks who wanted a more modern tech, so higher tech solution that could integrate with their tech stack and have those native integrations in place. So this reporting needs to be done every month from an operations standpoint to be able to understand, okay, these are the inputs and the ingredients, and then this is the final output of business performance. Now, how is it that we get there? Because there is a missing gap in this component where it's like, okay, we have the inputs of the time and the ingredients of our cake, and then we know what the delicious cake looks like being a profitable business. But then how is it that we can break out the other ingredients of the cake to understand actually what impacts those financial that financial success? So it's kind of like we've established where we are today with the current inputs or ingredients. And then we also know where it is that we want to go by building a profitable business, obviously, right? Like if this should just seem, it seems like so straightforward and obvious, but great business is just about executing the small things really well. And what I'm sharing with you guys is how to execute these small things really well from an operations standpoint to be able to scale to 8 figures per year, because you have the current capacity and then there's the additional bandwidth required and then the desired scale with the knowledge required and then the staff and time commitment. Now, if we just do this without understanding what I'm about to tell you guys, what'll happen is the same thing that I just described, where you have a full bucket of water, you have a business that's bringing in money, but there's no actual water trickling out for you as the founder because it's all in the business and it's not profitable. So the first thing that we need to identify from a fulfillment standpoint is, what do customers actually care about? Now, customers, I want to focus on obviously the end client in this case, but customers can also be like, what is it that management cares about? Who's actually the one that's consuming the information and using the data is really the customer in any given business. And who's actually being served by the process? We can use that definition for a customer. So looking at that, we need to say, okay, what is it they care about? And then what are the metrics that actually impact their success from our service? Now, we need to identify the leading indicators. What are the numbers on the front end that we know that we're winning? For example, it's like if we're going somewhere and we have the GPS, but we take a wrong turn, we need to have metrics baked into our process to say, oh shit, we took a wrong turn. And that's the same thing as the GPS saying, hey, you guys took a wrong turn. This is how we get back on track. Then we need to identify what the lagging indicators are. So what are the metrics that will come to fruition if we're doing our job right that are not immediate versus what is the immediate thing that we did? Because if we don't have the immediate metrics or the leading indicators, then we might find that we took a wrong turn several miles or kilometers ago without being able to identify it and then find out that we're completely off track. So, but the lagging indicator, think of that as the end destination of where it is that we're going on our road trip. Now, benchmarks. What are benchmarks? Why should you care? Well, with benchmarks, it's like, take 5 different products at different prices. How is it that you know that you're getting a good deal? If they're similar, if all 5 products are similar quality, it's price, right? Price is the benchmark in that equation that we're looking at. So another example would be to say, hey, I want to buy a home for $200,000. We have 5 homes that are similar, but one of them actually has a lot more amenities. It's in a safer neighborhood, but it's still at the same price. Now, because we have 5 other homes to compare that to, is the information is relative. We have the answer because information is relative. Data is relative. But if we just had that one house of $200,000, how would we know whether or not it's a good deal? Because we don't have any other houses to compare it to. So establishing benchmarks that lets us figure out, okay, what does good look like for a leading indicator? What does great look like for a leading indicator? What does not great look like for a leading indicator? And this is why research matters, is we need to be able to we need to know what our competitors' numbers are and what it is that they're doing, so we can understand, okay, based on these benchmarks, we're winning. Then we need to look at the platform that warehouses the data. So ideally it's something like Facebook, where we have all the numbers warehoused right there, all the data is right there and put together for us. We just need to do the work and it's ready to go. Now, sometimes there might be a little bit more of an additional process like ClickUp involved for us to bake in that process to say, hey, we know that this is good. We know that this is what success looks like, but we need to work around it. We need to actually input the numbers and input the data ourselves to get that output or to get that metric. So ideally, the work platform has all of that, and we don't need to track everything or input the numbers manually, but oftentimes it's not the case, and we need to input the numbers like a CRM. And then based on this data, we capture that raw data and then we feed it into a dashboard. Now, this can be ideally automate this or delegated to some type of VA or data entry person to input this information into a dashboard. But ideally, we want it automated. Now, those are the first two ingredients for establishing an 8-figure infrastructure. Is number one is understanding the exact cost of goods sold or cost of the work product, the ingredients, the cost of our ingredients. And then second is figuring out which ingredients there are to bake the cake. What are the ingredients that customers care about or flavors that they care about to deliver that work product and to know that it's good and a quality work product. And then lastly, the financial reporting to understand how those two ingredients, how profitable is the cake that we're selling. Now, getting back to the company structure, who's making the cake? Well, Ray Dalio talks about this in his book Principles, where as management, we always want to have a feedback loop between not only our direct reports, but the people that report to them as well. And that is the extent of the feedback that we want to collect. The reason is that we need, as CEOs and executives, we're flying at 30,000 feet. So we need to be able to triangulate issues. When I say triangulate, I mean identify them. To say, hey, like it's kind of like we're driving. It's kind of like we're driving in Waze, and there's a traffic light or speeding camera that can flag us and can capture our we need to be able to identify that. Butchered that analogy, but you know what I'm saying. Let me think in the meantime, I'll think of a better one. However, getting back to this is that we need to be able to understand, okay, it's kind of like, I was thinking about a girlfriend analogy there, but it's not going to work. If there's no way, if somebody who just has the feedback loop between you and if you don't have direct feedback between what's happening on the ground and you just have one source of information, then you're fucked. Like there was a company that I was an investor in, and the CEO was my only source of information. And so I had to take everything at face value. And he would paint a narrative based on what was happening that I had no objective source of truth to be able to identify what was happening. And so there's no way for me to know whether or not he was completely full of shit or whether or not he was delusional. And so, long story short, it blew up in my face because I did not have all the facts. And it's the same thing with your managers, because they're going to want to look good. They're going to have an ego complex. They're going to want to show you that they're doing an incredible job. And so without the feedback of between you and the direct person that they report to, between the feedback loop between you, the manager, and the person that report to them, there's no way to tell whether or not they're a good leader or not. Like, they could be a terrible leader, they could be a fucking cancer, and there's no way to know because we're just taking everything that they say at face value without having a feedback loop between you and the direct reports. So this is a critical part of the infrastructure. And a great way to do this is with employee surveys. Now, if you want my process on employee surveys, that'll be another video. So looking at this, the actual structure itself, the execution of this, right? There needs to be somebody that's actively working on and improving the process who is not the CEO. Why? Because it goes back to the dull knife analogy. If the CEO is focused on refining as many of these knives as possible, they're just not going to be as sharpening these knives. They're just not going to be very sharp. And then the company and the customer is going to suffer from a mediocre service delivery that's just not continuously improving. Now, the most important job of an executive, and after you've gotten to a point where you are out of the day-to-day operations, is looking forward at the future, is to understand how markets mature and how markets develop and how this current market is moving and improving in a way to deliver better results for customers. Because as every market matures, the amount, it's like, as markets mature, what happens is twofold, right? Number one, the cost is, say, for example, we're selling apples. The market starts off selling apples for $1. Now, somebody's reselling those apples for $3. Well, somebody else is going to be undercutting them to buy those apples, figure out how to buy those apples for 70 cents, and then sell those apples for I can't remember what it was like $10, $7, whatever it is. And as that market matures, things get more sophisticated, things get more advanced. The results that are produced for customers improve and get better because people are competing, and the people that deliver the best results for customers are going to be the winners of that market. So it's critical to understand how the market's becoming more sophisticated over time, which is the number one job of the C-suite executive. And if we are too focused on the day-to-day operations, then eventually we put ourselves into risk to just get fucking wiped out. And that's exactly what happened to me. Even though I was able to sell, the improvements that I wasn't able to make, the systematic improvements on the business, because I was very much focused on solving all the problems, putting out all the fires, and working on all the day-to-day operations. Now, despite that, I was still able to make the business more profitable over time. However, I wasn't able to look at I did not have the bandwidth to look at the macro level trends to be able to anticipate how interest rates in real estate would impact our service delivery and how that would impact our customers. So it ended up becoming this sort of black swan event that I just didn't anticipate, that significantly impacted our ability to fulfill. So looking at this structure, the main difference between this is the simplicity and just how everything is organized, right? I mean, here, the CEO is managing everybody directly. Now, how to set up a proper fulfillment infrastructure, as well as whether it's sales or whatever. When I say fulfillment, I'm not just limiting that to service delivery, but also marketing, sales, customer experience, etc. Each one of these departments needs a champion to look at the strategy that's being used to be able to continue to iterate and improve on that strategy. And then give that to a project manager to be able to relay those tasks that are required to execute that strategy to the executor itself. And the same thing that I talked about with feedback loops is that this leader needs feedback loops between the project manager and the executor itself. Because this person should be focused on the strategy, continuous improvement of the business, making incremental gains in whichever department that is. Now, with sales, it's slightly different. How I would structure sales is hiring a senior sales leader first prior to just an individual manager. If sales is not your core competency, it changes if sales is your core competency. And if that's your main skill set, then you could get away with doing this a little bit longer and being in sales longer, as opposed to just delegating it entirely. Because the second responsibility to the CEO is to focus on growth, and sales being part of that, and then also recruiting to be able to continue to build the infrastructure that the business uses to support its clients. So sales is a bit of you don't want to take especially if you're the number one sales rep in the company, if your close rate goes from 40% to 20%, you're literally having the performance of the business right there. So it's a massive risk to delegate sales too early, which is why it's okay for the CEO to be in the sales role a bit longer. However, they should not be in the fulfillment and marketing strategy roles for any longer than they need to be. So, in conclusion, if you want this infrastructure deployed for your business, or if you have some questions about how to execute this infrastructure, if you want somebody to come in that's a little more hands-on, part of what we do at Bread is a fractional executive service. So go ahead, book a call with me in the link below, and I'll go ahead and I'll give you this free asset included, and we'll also walk you through a free strategy session. Oftentimes, these deals are quite substantial for the scope and what's required to execute them. So we're really not trying to sell. We really want to make sure that we're a right fit on the first end. Like if we are, great. When I say that we're really not trying to sell, it's not like a traditional high ticket sales process. It's really more of a strategy consultative based approach, which we're happy to build you one of these project or personalized types of flows and org chart and what that looks like as part of that call. So go ahead, book the call. I mean, most consultancies charge like $2,500 just for that, and we'll just include that for free because we want you to become our client. So go ahead, book the call below, and I'll see you on the other side.